Thanks for being here, everybody. And I'm just looking in the chat. We have people from all across the state, which is so exciting to see, from, way upstate to, let's see, do we have anyone from Long Island yet? I always love seeing the diversity of people who join these, and we're so grateful to everyone for your interest and commitment to acting on climate and taking action in a variety of different ways, including supporting legislation like the New York Heat Act. So really appreciate you being here for your lunch hour and ending the week with us. So it's now 12:04. We should probably get going, I think, Mel. Yeah, okay. Always looking to my wonderful colleagues at NYCP who are star organizers and Zoomers on here. So thanks as always, Melissa and Lisa. Lisa Marshall in particular helped pull all of this together and is going to be sharing the all-important take action after we hear from our experts about what we can do to support this legislation. And perhaps many of you saw Lisa as she toured across the state with the New York Heat Act hot chili tour this fall. So Lisa has been a very busy bee working to advance this legislation and continuing to with bringing this presentation together. So thank you so much for that. And thank you everybody for being here. We really appreciate it. And thanks to our speakers, Chris Casey, Allison Considine, Jessica Azulay. First up, we are going to hear from Chris. And Chris Casey is a senior attorney with the Climate and Clean Energy Program for the NRDC. Chris, do you want to take it away?
Sure. Hi. Very happy to be here. Very excited to see all the turnout and people here to learn about NYHeat. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why New York's clean energy transition is threatened by certain state laws that perpetuate, promote, and subsidize fossil gas use. So let's jump into it. Go to the next slide. So the context for all of this is New York's clean energy law, which is the nation-leading climate leadership and community protection act, often called the CLCPA or simply the Climate Act. It sets forth very ambitious economy-wide climate and clean energy targets that are ultimately requiring the entire economy to collectively transition to a net zero emissions by 2050. And you can see in the picture here, there's lots of kind of intermediate targets along the way, a number of them specific to the electric sector. There's also some 2030 emission reduction target that's not mentioned here. And then in addition to the climate targets and clean energy targets set forth in the Act, Climate Act also includes a number of really important provisions for climate justice that prioritize equity in fighting climate change to ensure that disadvantaged communities are not left behind in New York's clean energy transition. So collectively, some climate justice and emission reduction targets and other clean energy targets. Slide. So the achievement of these equity and climate targets require a transition of the gas system. Currently, New York, most of New York's emissions come from the consumption of natural gas. Natural gas is actually the energy that is most consumed, as you can see by the chart on the left. And, according to the Climate Action Council, which was a group of stakeholders from different interests around the state set up by the Climate Act, that that entity, the Climate Action Council, was tasked with coming up with a scoping plan, which provides kind of the blueprint or roadmap for achieving our Climate Act targets. The scoping plan identified that to achieve our targets, there needs to be a dramatic reduction of gas use, particularly in the buildings and electric sector, but also the industrial sector, really across the board. And most gas customers will need to transition to electricity for the things that they currently use fossil fuels for today. And the scoping plan had a whole chapter on transitioning the gas system. And basically that chapter said that all of the information before it demonstrates that there needs to be a well-planned and strategic downsizing of the gas system that takes place as quickly as possible and to the greatest extent possible in order to enable us to kind of maximize the benefits of the clean energy transition and minimize the costs, and in particular, stranded costs, which would be kind of will need to be paid for by someone, very likely utility customers or New York taxpayers in some way, shape, or form. And stranded costs are essentially, the cost of infrastructure that are no longer used, and so basically having, paying for something that is no longer providing a benefit. Next slide. So the scoping plan calls for legislative action to enable this well-planned and strategic downsizing of the gas system. It does this because there are parts of the public service law that are in tension and really in direct conflict with our ability to achieve the climate and justice targets in the Climate Act. The Public Service Law, which is Chapter 48 of the laws of New York, establishes, it's the set of laws that establish the Public Service Commission and set forth its duties and responsibilities for regulating the state's electric, gas, steam, telecommunications, and water utilities. And sometimes public utility commissions like the Public Service Commission in New York are referred to as creatures of statute because they're essentially these administrative agencies that are created by the legislature, and the legislature delegates to them duties that otherwise would fall on the legislature in order to kind of regulate this area of the economy. And at a very high level, the Public Service Law is directs and guides the commission on how to regulate in the public interest. The Public Service Commission can really only has the power to do things that are kind of within the bounds of the delegated authority from the legislature. So kind of within the bounds of what is described in the Public Service Law. But at a really high level, what the Public Service Law is aiming to do is direct the commission to regulate utility service to ensure that affordable, safe, secure, and reliable access to various utility services is there for residential and business customers throughout New York, and that it's available at just and reasonable rates while also protecting New York's natural environment. The problem is that, let's go back to, the problem is that the existing Public Service Law has certain provisions in it that promote and subsidize the expansion of the gas system, which is really, a legacy of, many decades old law, if not, close to 100 years, and something that was meant to, enable these key utility services getting out to everyone. But there are a number of provisions that are promoting and subsidizing the expansion of the gas system at a time when we, now know that we need to strategically downsize it. And I'll focus on two of those provisions. One is commonly known as the 100-foot rule, and it basically requires that anyone who wants gas service has a right to be kind of hooked up to the gas system. And the 100-foot rule actually requires that existing gas customers, essentially pay for, and this ends up being a subsidy to those new customers or new buildings that want to hook up to the utilities infrastructure. So we have, existing gas customers paying and subsidizing the growth of the system so that it can attach to new buildings and serve more customers. Again, at a time when we know we need to shrink the system. The other provision, and this is the one that is probably the biggest impediment to the clean energy transition, is commonly known as the obligation to serve. And basically the utility is required to provide gas service to anybody who requests it. With, there are some conditions on that. Customers have to, pay their energy bills and things like that, but they're obligated to serve customers. And the obligation to provide gas service also creates a legal entitlement for customers to access that service. And so if we are trying to transition the system and downsize the system and transition folks to the electric system, if we come up with a project that is, it might be the cheapest thing, the best thing for all of the utilities customers. It might be something that would be, looked on favorably for most of the customers that would be transitioned, but a single customer basically has the ability to block it or to veto those kinds of projects because they have this legal entitlement to gas service. And so this obligation to serve essentially creates a really powerful practical barrier to transitioning to electricity, which is just a much, much cleaner form of energy. And so recognizing this, the folks on the Climate Action Council in their scoping plan called on the legislature to review and modify laws that are in conflict with the Climate Act to ensure that the Commission and utilities don't have conflicting legal mandates, and they have the clear authority and ability to advance utility service in a way that enables the clean energy transition to move forward. Next slide. And, addressing this conflict in the law is really, really urgent, because the more we kind of make new investments in traditional fossil gas infrastructure, we are really jeopardizing our ability to have an equitable, affordable, and orderly transition. And I'm not going to get into all of why that is, because Allison's going to speak a lot to that in the next slide. But just wanted to kind of highlight some of the costs that we're bearing now. So for this 100-foot rule and the subsidies that are happening now for the expansion of the gas system to new customers, that's over the last 5 years, it's cost about $1 billion. So it's been about $1 billion subsidy, or $200 million a year that, again, we're just putting into the same gas infrastructure. But the even bigger problem than that is that there are lots of massive, like, new investments in the gas system that need to be made to maintain the safety and reliability of that system, which is one of the Commission's core goals. And kind of the best example of this and the most pervasive around the state is what is known as leak-prone pipe, which is New York has, I think it's the state with the second most amount of miles of leak-prone pipe of any state in the entire US. We have over 7,000 miles, and it might be even a lot higher than that if kind of depending what materials you count. And leak-prone pipe is basically just old pipe made of certain materials that are prone to breaking and thus causing gas leaks. And that doesn't mean that all of this 7,000 miles are actually leaking. Actually, most of it is functional pipe, but because it is kind of at the end of its useful life and made of materials that are no longer used, there's real pressure to replace it, because if there is a gas leak, there are lots of ways that can create very severe safety risks. And so gas utilities are facing this choice of either replacing that pipe at a massively expensive cost to utility ratepayers, but in the absolute financial interest of these utilities, or they need to retire that pipe. They need to transition the customers who are served by that pipe to electricity and retire it. And again, that is just extremely hard to do when a single customer on a section of pipe could veto a project. And we were to replace all of the leak-prone pipe across the state. Synapse Energy Economics has estimated for us that that's going to cost New Yorkers about $150 billion, and more than half of that cost will come after, more than half of that bill will still be due after 2050, when we're supposed to be at a net zero economy. And so, you know, that represents just massive stranded cost risk. Next slide. So the New York Heat Act addresses all this by removing the barriers, removing the provision, or amending the provisions that promote and subsidize the gas system, in addition to a couple of other things. It also empowers the Public Service Commission to equitably achieve the Climate Act through kind of equitable achievement of it, an express regulatory objective. Again, it removes these provisions that are in tension with the Climate Act. And in doing this, it facilitates a well-planned and strategic downsizing of the gas system by enabling community-scale solutions that can help transition customers and facilitate an orderly downsizing of the gas system. And it does this by enabling non-pipeline alternatives at scale, at a community scale. And basically what this looks like is you would take, you know, the money that you would be investing in investing to replace a section of pipe. So basically, you know, dig up the streets and, you know, put brand new pipe that's supposed to last the next 80 or 100 years. All of that cost you could instead redirect and use to electrify all of the customers who are served by that section of pipe. And it's very likely that in a lot of instances, doing that will actually be cheaper than just replacing the pipe. So it will save all utility customers money while also paying for the things that are needed to move customers from fossil gas over to electricity, while still meeting all of their needs, and really meeting all those needs in a way that really improves their home, the quality and comfort in their home, the value of their home, their experience in it. And so it will enable this and kind of not allow a single customer to kind of veto what is good for the collective good. And it does this while also establishing some really important protections for vulnerable customers to make sure that they're protected and that utility service is affordable to them throughout the transition. And yeah, that's it. I am now going to pass it over to Allison, who will go into a little bit more detail about
all of those reasons we need to pass the New York Heat Act. Yes. Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
My name is Allison Considine. I'm going to be building off of that great information Chris shared, and particularly doing a deep dive onto a report that BDC released this past year in partnership with Groundwork Data. So I am Senior Campaign and Communications Manager for the Building Decarbonization Coalition. Really excited to be part of this group and part of Renewable Heat Now. BDC harnesses the power of coalition to forge paths to upgrade and power homes and buildings with clean electricity, uniting people, policymakers, workers, building industry stakeholders, and environmental groups at every level to join in the movement for building decarbonization. So if we go to the next slide, why talk about the future of gas in New York? So we really commissioned this report and worked with Groundwork Data to assist at this critical early moment in gas distribution system transition planning. This report draws on existing research, adds new data on several key topics, including the costs of the gas distribution system, the fragility of gas utility business models to competition from new electric technologies, and the hurdles to substituting fuels like renewable natural gas or hydrogen for fossil gas, and offers a synthesis of these and other factors in a series of 4 scenario discussions, which I'll get into in this presentation. Chris was just talking about some of these figures, but as we all know, following the passage of the CLCPA, one of our biggest challenges is really what we're going to do about slashing building emissions, and that requires a focus on the gas system. The use of gas in buildings accounts for about 25% of emissions, and this is distributed by utilities that are then regulated by the Public Service Commission. The gas system in New York today serves about 5 million customers, about 4.6 million of whom are residential customers. There's nearly 50,000 miles of gas distribution pipes, and an additional 3.3 million miles of service lines, which connect those distribution lines to buildings. And like Chris said, there's about 8,000 miles of leak-prone pipe remaining in New York. In the past decade alone, gas utilities have added $16 billion to their balance sheets, servicing these pipes, which has only resulted in 1,600 miles of new pipe. So we sort of have this dual crisis of an aging leak-prone system that would require increasingly expensive investments, and gas utilities continuing to expand pipes to new buildings. So this leak-prone pipe problem really represents a key opportunity to begin the strategic decommissioning of the gas system rather than furthering this investment. Next slide, please. So this report had a few key findings. I'm not going to read them all off, but the sort of highlight is that the historic gas utility business model is no longer working. So historically, here was the deal. Gas utilities invest heavily in gas infrastructure. They're regulated monopolies, which means they have an exclusive territory where they provision gas service. This is a good thing because it allows for responsible management of the public right-of-way. People can count on there being a utility service the same way we have water utilities, electric, et cetera. These utilities, in exchange for having this monopoly, are regulated by the Public Service Commission. And they can receive a regulated rate of return for investments in this infrastructure that's approved by the Public Service Commission. This rate of return regulation incentivizes expansion as gas utilities make their money primarily from capital expenses, so investments in that infrastructure. Most of the costs of the frack gas running through these pipes are just passed along to customers, so fluctuations in price from external affairs, are just kind of passed on through. But this also means that a decline in consumption, so if you have a more efficient appliance, doesn't actually lead to a decline in system costs because those are fixed infrastructure costs. It just leads to higher rates per therm of energy. And gas companies and regulators have historically controlled the cost of gas in a couple of ways that are really starting to show their cracks and aren't workable anymore. So they've added new customers through network expansion, a bit of a pyramid scheme here, right? So expansion provides diminishing returns at this point because more and more customers are transitioning off the gas system by choice to heat pumps and electric technologies. Additionally, they've kept costs low, artificially low for the system, because gas pipes are depreciated over many decades. Sometimes they're on like an 80-year depreciation timeline. So payments are spread out, but I don't think any of us would feel very confident making a bet today that a new gas pipe installed in 2023 is going to be used in 70 years, especially knowing that we need to have significant emission reductions by 2050 in the law and as a moral imperative to get climate change under control. And lastly, there's a lot of old leaky gas pipes in the system, leak-prone pipes in the system, like I mentioned, and the replacement of this is coming at an increasingly high cost. Next slide, please. So just to kind of drill down on those numbers a little bit more of why we need the New York Heat Act to prevent this future cost crisis. Since the CLCPA's passage in 2019, gas utilities have spent $5 billion to maintain and expand their gas networks, and they're on pace to incur an additional $28 billion in capital expenditures through 2043. The cost to replace a mile of that leak-prone pipe that we were discussing averages $3 to $6 million per mile, which works out to about $60,000 per customer served. So we are already spending a tremendous amount of money on the current system, and that money could be better spent on investing in healthier, safer electrification alternatives. And so all of these costs are driving up our utility bills and kind of stand in the way of the necessary managed phase transition off the gas system to electrification. Next slide, please. So this kind of shows, and I'll make sure to drop the report link in the report, but groundwork data basically looked at 4 scenarios for the future of the gas system. Scenario 1, that top bar, requires ongoing investment in the gas system. It would require some decarbonization of that gas to meet climate goals. That's things like alternative fuels, which many of us are familiar with the infeasibility of that, both from a cost and just like availability perspective. And it fails to achieve outcomes across the board. So it doesn't protect costs, it doesn't protect equity, it doesn't reduce emissions. This is not an equitable, cost-effective path for New York to meet its climate goals. Scenario 2 is pretty much our current scenario, or how the state and the Public Service Commission are approaching gas planning right now. This is an unmanaged transition off pipeline gas. So consumers are choosing to leave the gas system, but utilities aren't being forced to put forward plans that really adapt for that and work to protect affordability, equity, health, et cetera. Scenario 3 would look at hybrid heating. So having folks electrify while also maintaining the gas system as a backup. While this allows for some benefits of electrification, it doesn't address the cost issues at all. So you're paying for an incredibly expensive gas system into perpetuity, and then also paying for transition to electrification on top of that. So really the only scenario that protects consumers, protects costs, and works to meet our climate goals is scenario 4, a managed phase transition off the gas system. This would halt the growth of the gas system, avoid reinvestment in the gas system, and have the PSC take an authoritative role directing gas utility and really all utility plans for neighborhood scale transition. And luckily, we've started making progress towards that because of the strength of our movements. So we passed the All Electric Buildings Act, helping to stop that growth. And now we're really looking for the PSC to lead this transition. But this is also where the New York Heat Act comes in, because we need the legislature to really direct the PSC towards this and give them the authority to enact scenario 4. If we go to the next slide. This looks confusing, but really just kind of shows if we stick with like scenario 1 and 2, this is what we're heading towards, and it would be disastrous. So this kind of represents a deep dive on scenario 2, an unmanaged transition off the gas system. This is electrification for those who can afford it and high bills for those who can't. If we keep reinvesting in the gas pipeline system, costs will go up. New projects today, some of them are costing $10 million per mile for new gas pipeline. New technology like heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, network geothermal, thermal energy networks will greatly reduce the demand for gas, which will create a feedback loop of high cost and high attrition. So this old school gas utility business model that kept gas cheap is no longer working. So if you kind of look, the gray chart is gas rates over time. You can see this goes out through 2050. And as gas consumption and customers decrease, the gas rates on those remaining customers would increase. We can avoid the scenario if the state starts taking action now, but this would be really disastrous for affordability and equity and managing this transition in a way that protects those critical goals. Next slide, please. So this kind of just adds a little bit of a finer point onto that scenario 2. So you can see if we have about a halving of the number of gas customers on the system. So like every other person who's currently on the gas system disconnects, switches to all electric, that shrinking ratepayer base will mean that people's utility bills in 2050 for those remaining on the gas system could be up to $1,500 a month. That's already really bad and unsupportable. That's like more than rent. If 75% of customers leave the gas system, costs double again, $3,000 a month. And if 90% of customers leave the gas system, for those 10% remaining, they would be looking at utility bills almost to the tune of $9,000 a month. Next slide, please. So there were several key recommendations of the report. And like I said, I'll make sure to share it in the chat so you can see recommendations for the state, for the Public Service Commission, but a really prime recommendation is to update the utility laws that impede implementation of New York's climate law. So this is what Chris's whole presentation was just about, but really we need the legislature to amend the current laws that stand in the way of achieving scenario 4. They need to amend the utility obligation to serve gas. They need to end the 100-foot rule cross subsidy, which is costing us $200 million per year to defray the cost of extending gas lines to customers. And they need to really enable this neighborhood scale transition. So the New York Heat Act really meets the goal, one of the key recommendations of this report. Thank you so much for the chance to present on this. We should have a 2-pager on this shared in the chat. Like I said, I'll share the report. And I think this just really underscores that the New York Heat Act won't just protect affordability today, it will help steer us away from this real equity and cost crisis that will happen if the state doesn't take strong action and give the authority to the PSC that it needs to really start protecting all of us and enacting a just and equitable transition. I'm going to pass it to Jessica now.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jessica Azulay. I'm Executive Director at Alliance for a Green Economy. Hopefully y'all can hear me. If you can't, just speak up and let me know. So I think so far, I think Betta described New York Heat as the most important climate bill this upcoming legislative session, and I don't disagree with that. But I also think that New York Heat is the most important energy affordability bill for the upcoming legislative session as well. And I'm going to discuss a little bit about why. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to cover the current energy affordability situation in New York, some strategies for improving energy affordability, and then how New York Heat helps address affordability issues. So first, starting with the current energy affordability situation. So I think, those of you who have heard a lot of the advocacy around New York Heat or around energy affordability might hear this number 6% thrown around, and you might not know what we're talking about. 6% is the percentage of household income that national experts have determined is a reasonable amount that households can afford for energy. So that's kind of a national energy affordability standard. And it is the established goal from the Public Service Commission that they're trying to achieve, that no household pays more than 6% of their income toward their utility bills. Next slide. So how are we doing so far? There's a lot of different data sources for this. This is one of them from the US Department of Energy. And what you can see here is that the lowest income people in the state are paying the highest percentage of their income for energy. So for those who are 30% below median income, and just to remind people, if you haven't taken math in a long time, the median means that half of the households are above the median and half are below. So 30% below state median income, this is about 15% of households, or 1.1 million households in New York, are paying an average of 15% of their income for energy. So those are the most vulnerable, and they're paying the highest percent of their income, which means that energy bills are really unequitable in New York, and that we have regressive rates. Between 30 and 60% of the median, the average is 6%. So that means that there's a lot of people in that income bracket that are also above 6%. When you get down or up to between 60 and 80% of income, and even higher than that, start to see the bills being more in that energy affordability range. But because these are averages, again, there's still going to be people, especially in that 60 to 80%, or the 80% to 100, that are paying more than 6% of their income toward energy. Okay, next slide. Just another dimension of the energy affordability crisis that we face in New York is to look at how many people are behind on their bills. So this is from August 2023. It's the last month where we have compiled data, but you can get this every single month at the Public Service Commission. So we have over 1.2 million households in New York that are 60 days or more behind on their energy bills, and they owe collectively over $1.3 billion. Because of that, in that month alone, in August alone, there were almost 500,000 disconnection notices that went out to households in New York, and almost 35,000 households had their utilities shut off because of inability to pay or because of non-payment. The percentage, oh, can you go back one sec? I just want to point out, this is about 14% of households that are in arrears more than 60 days. And the average debt to the utility that those customers have is over $1,000. Okay, next slide. So, I think that I just want to make an argument for why, in addition to being pushing for New York Heat as a really critical climate bill, we in the climate movement and the environmental movement should also be pushing for energy affordability. The inability to pay energy bills is a really serious thing for households that can't afford it. It has major impacts on people's ability to afford food, afford medications and healthcare. It also is a major driver of homelessness and of the government agencies taking children out of the home when people experience utility shutoffs. We also need an equitable distribution of the upfront costs of climate action. We know that climate action over time is going to save us a lot of money, because climate change and allowing runaway climate change is going to be extremely expensive. And if we can reduce the dirty energy that we're using, we'll improve our health, and that will also have cost savings for us individually and as a society. But to make this change, we're going to have to pay for the upfront costs of making the change. And we want to make sure that we are distributing those costs equitably. That's the morally just thing to do. And policies that do that also make those policies more politically possible and helps us build a more powerful movement. Next slide. Okay, so some strategies for achieving energy affordability. So there's a bunch of different programs that help individual households with energy affordability. One is a federally funded program called HEAP. It's a utility assistance program that helps people afford their energy bills. On top of that, and complementary to it, we also have the Utility Energy Affordability Program that was established by the Public Service Commission, and that is funded by utility customers in New York, and it also provides a discount on people's utility bills, trying to get low-income people down to 6% of their income spent on energy. The governor has also included twice in her budget the last couple of years allocations from the state funds, so funded by taxpayers, funding to help with debt relief, utility debt relief, and to bulk up the amount of money going to the energy affordability program. Energy efficiency is also a very important energy affordability strategy. So energy efficiency programs that serve low-income customers, that helps them save energy, also help them save money. It's a really important affordability strategy. Solar energy is another really important energy affordability strategy. If you can help people through the upfront costs of solar energy, installing it, their electricity bills go down, and participation in community solar also helps provide discounts on energy bills. And then heat pumps in some circumstances, especially when moving from the most expensive fuels like fuel oil, propane, kerosene, and electric resistance heating, can be a very important energy affordability strategy for customers. Next slide. There's also strategies for bringing down energy costs that affect all households. So I've put here on the slide, this is from NYSEG, one of the utilities in upstate New York. If you look at your utility bill, you're paying for two things. You're paying for the actual gas itself, the gas supply, and that's in the blue part of the bar. And you're also paying for the pipes that deliver the gas, and that's the green in the delivery side. And then there's little minimal surcharges as well. So we can get to both. There are strategies to reduce both of these, to reduce the supply costs. Reducing reliance on expensive energy sources is a really important strategy so getting off of volatile and expensive fossil fuels is an important strategy for reducing that blue bar. We can also reduce peak demand, which reduces costs, and reducing peak demand also reduces the need for how much infrastructure we have to build. So it can help get to that green bar. And then we can also increase our utilization of the grid, which basically, because the gas system itself and the electric system as well, they're fixed assets, right? And I think Chris and Allison discussed some of this. But as customers, we're paying for a fixed asset, a bunch of pipes and wires. And if we can avoid the peak energy use, we can avoid having to build that infrastructure out. And if we can better utilize the grid, that actually reduces the cost per kilowatt hour for each customer. So better grid utilization is also an energy affordability strategy. There are also strategies for more fairly distributing the costs. And the energy affordability program that I discussed is one of them. What that does is it charges all ratepayers money to help fund that program, and then helps lower income customers. And so it's shifting costs from the higher income customers, or shifting costs from lower income customers to higher income customers. One of the downsides of that program is that there's about 2.7 million low-income households in New York, and only about 1.1 million of those households are actually enrolled in that program. So we need to enroll more people in that program. And then rate design is another way to more fairly distribute costs. And rate design is, simply put, the way that we distribute the costs of the gas infrastructure and the electric infrastructure across the entire customer base. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. We don't just charge people based on how much energy they use. We actually do a lot of different things in our rate design to distribute the costs. And right now, generally, our rate design makes it so that the more energy you use in a lot of parts of the state, the lower you pay, the smaller amount you pay per unit of energy. And so what that means is the higher income households that tend on average to use more energy are paying less per unit of energy than lower income households. Higher energy users, people that are not conserving as much and have more appliances, are paying less per unit of energy than those who are conserving or have fewer appliances. And we need to reverse this to get to more fairly distributing the costs. Okay, so finally, I'm just going to talk real quickly about how New York Heat helps with a lot of these energy affordability strategies. Next slide. So New York Heat is a comprehensive energy affordability bill. It reduces reliance on expensive fossil fuels. It reduces infrastructure costs through the elimination of the 100-foot rule and the enablement of the neighborhood transition. So avoiding those costly gas infrastructure investments in favor of more cost-effective electrification options. It reduces stranded assets, which the bill for which is going to come due later, and we're all going to pay for it if we don't reduce it. It improves the electric grid utilization by accelerating heat pump adoption. And it codifies the 6% energy affordability in the goal, which we think will really motivate the Public Service Commission to get more people enrolled in that energy affordability program, as well as pursue other strategies for achieving energy affordability, such as targeting energy efficiency programs to low-income customers who are now experiencing energy burdens above 6%, distributing solar credits and discounts from solar energy to those high burdened households, and fixing the rate design so that it is more equitable. So that is the end of my presentation, and I think I'm going to pass it over back to Betta and Lisa to talk about how we can take action to pass New York Heat.
Thanks so much, Jessica, and thanks to all of our brilliant presenters. Lisa, do you want to take it away with what people can do now?
Yes, thank you so much, Betta, and thanks to all of our wonderful presenters. It is, as you can tell, a lot to take in. It's a big bill. We've been working on this bill since before it had a name and when it had another name before this name, because it is just so important. And for anyone who attended yesterday's Public Service Commission meeting, you might have noticed that, the Public Service Commission is asking all the utilities to do gas planning, and National Fuel Gas is the first one. And because New York Heat isn't passed, there's just a limit to what the Public Service Commission can require this utility to do to comply with our climate law. So it's very, very important that it passed this year. And that's why we're all working so hard. I saw a lot of questions in the chat about strategy. And one of the most important things we need to do right now is to pressure our governor to put the New York Heat Act in her executive budget, which she's probably finalizing any day now. So, and then once her budget comes out, it's going to turn to the legislature to get it into their budgets, because this is kind of the easiest path to passage of any bill, is to get it included in the big ugly budget bill. So I'm going to ask all of you to help us to build the grassroots support to make this bill inevitable. And the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is sign our digital postcard. I just put the link in the chat. Oops, I'm going to put it again. And those postcards are going to the governor and her energy staff, and to encourage her to put at least parts. Well, we're encouraging to put all of the bill in her budget. We're hearing a lot of pushback on the 6%, and we need to push really hard on all the pieces, including the 6%, to pass it. So I'm giving folks a chance to fill out that postcard. And Melissa, if I could have the next slide, we'll go to the next action. Okay, so we have been calling the governor's office, because I said they're finalizing the budget right now. Marry as many times as you want and ask everyone you know to sign it. So we've been calling the governor's office every 5 minutes, yesterday and today, to ask her to make sure to include NY Heat in her budget. if you look at this spreadsheet I just linked in the chat, you can see there's 2 tabs at the bottom. One says Thursday and one says Friday. And there's a very sad thing about this spreadsheet is that the Friday part has a big gap from 2:30 to 3:10 with nobody signed up to make a call, and another gap from 3:35 to 3:50. So, and a couple more gaps after that. So if everyone on this call can find 5 minutes today to make this call, if you don't want to talk to someone, you can press 1 and just leave the message if you're feeling shy. And then all you have to do is sign up and then text the next person in line after you and remind them to make their call, because, you know, we all get busy and we forget that we signed up for this call relay. So if you guys could just help us out by filling out the rest of that spreadsheet and making sure there are no gaps left on the Friday tab, we would so appreciate it. And of course, you're very welcome to call other times, but this is, we just want to make sure everyone gets we want to make sure they're getting called every 5 minutes for 2 days. Oh, Diane, thank you for calling. I so appreciate that. It's okay to not be in the list. Making the call is the important thing. So I'm just going to give folks one few more seconds to fill that out. How are we doing on time? We're running out of time. So yes, the NY Heat Telethon. Okay, next slide, Melissa. So the last thing I'm going to ask you to do, and this is the hardest one. I started with the easiest one, then the phone call's a little bit harder, and this one's the hardest, but they're also in order of importance, right? We are going to have a huge rally and lobby day in Albany on Tuesday, January 23rd, and we have a goal of having 300 advocates from all parts of New York show up on this day. There's going to be carpools, there's going to be buses. It's just so important that we pack Albany with our bodies and our voices on the 23rd of January. If you cannot travel on the 23rd, many people can't. We'll also try to have some things you can do from home on the 23rd, but it is really important for those legislators. Somebody said, how do you get legislators to care? Well, what you do is you show up and they show up, and then they see all of you and you see all of them, and that's how we get them to care. It's a lot of pressure. And then we're going to walk around, drop off literature, meet with legislators in their offices. This bill has actually got a lot of support. We have about 75 co-sponsors in the Assembly. The bill has passed the Senate twice. So we really need to turn up the pressure and just get it over the threshold. But 75 co-sponsors in the Assembly is actually quite good. But they need you so that they can have a spine. Next slide. So next week, we're going to take our final action of 2023, which is just going to be a social media action. We'll have a little social media toolkit. A lot of you have done these before. I'll be sharing around the toolkit and reminding you to take action if you fill out this form today. And that is the end of my part. We're going to see if we have a little bit of time for questions now. Next slide, Melissa. And just want to let you guys know, we had a lot of important questions. What we generally do here at NYCP is we make a note of all those questions. We ask our presenters to fill in their answers in a written way. And we distribute the questions, the recording, the slides, and all of the links to you shortly after the call, probably early next week, we'll be able to get to that. So let's unshare the slides. Thank you all so much. And we'll be happy to entertain your questions for at least the next 3 minutes. Perhaps we have time to go slightly over. Please unspotlight me.
Well, and people have been doing a great job of answering questions as we've been going along. And I don't need to be spotlighted either. But as Lisa said, we will send an email with the recording and the PowerPoint and the questions and the answers and all kinds of links to take action. So don't worry about that. We will get to your questions if they haven't been answered. I saw a couple of people interested in the costs for electrical rewiring in order to enable clean heat, and we can connect you with resources. But really, with New York Heat, we would be shifting from spending the millions and billions of dollars on investing in the gas system to helping building owners make the switch. So that's a key element of all of this that we want to keep in mind, but we can certainly connect you with resources that are available today. I do see one question that a couple of people had that I think I'll toss to Jessica, which relates to the pushback on the 6%. Jessica, you spoke eloquently about why this is not only a very important climate bill, but why it is an energy affordability one. So do you want to speak to, why we would be having trouble with that element of the bill?
Yeah, thank you for that, Betta. It actually is shocking to me that we are having so much pushback on the 6%. So I'm hesitant to characterize exactly why, because it is already a stated goal of the Public Service Commission to achieve 6%, no more than 6% energy burden for low-income households. But it is a very popular provision of the bill because people are really struggling with their energy bills, and it makes sense to protect the most vulnerable. I think part of the reason there's pushback on that is because it's such a popular provision, and we see our opposition pushing back on the things that they might know are driving some of the momentum behind the bill. I think there's also a concern that the way that we'll achieve that 6% energy burden goal is by charging all the other ratepayers to then help provide utility discounts for low-income people. And from our perspective and in the bill language, that is not the only way to achieve the 6% energy goal. And it's not the only way that the Commission has stated its intention is to achieve the energy affordability goal. I think when the Commission established the energy affordability program and those utility discounts, they acknowledged that there's many different ways to achieve that through energy efficiency, through renewable energy credits, and other strategies. So the New York Heat Act actually has provisions that call on the Public Service Commission to explore all of those different strategies so that we're not just relying on achieving the 6% through ratepayer funded utility discounts. But I will also say that those ratepayer funded utility discounts right now, they're 2% of our energy bills. That the cost of the gas infrastructure and the rate hikes that we're seeing, which are in the double digits, are so much more expensive than what it costs to help low-income people afford their energy bills. So I just want to put that in perspective.
Thanks,
Thank you so much for that, Jessica. Oh, sorry about talking over you.
That's okay. And it's 1:02. I know people are going to have to start dropping off. Maybe we have time for like one or two more questions. Lisa, I'll defer to you if you want to grab one more from the chat. But just before people do start to disappear, I want to thank everybody so much for being here, for participating, to our speakers who are also fierce advocates in the fight, and many of our other activists and allies are in this meeting today. So we so appreciate all of your energy that you're bringing to this. We are going to win this one, and we just need to keep the pressure up and keep the heat on. So thank you everybody so much for being here. But Lisa, are there any other, as we squeeze another couple of minutes out of people's day, questions that you think
Yes, there's so many good questions, but I saw one about the exorbitant cost of upgrading the electrical system in a multifamily building so that you can have heat pumps and induction stoves. Right now, people in New York City are like, oh, I want to get off gas. And they dutifully go out and buy a beautiful induction stove and then bring it home and find out they can't actually plug it in because their building isn't ready to support it. So how does the New York Heat Act help with this terrible electrification dilemma? Which of my speakers wants to take that one?
I think I see Chris coming off mute.
Saw Chris volunteer for that one because that is such an important question and one that we get a lot.
Yeah, so a couple different ways. I mean, I think first and foremost, this right now, the gas utilities are not planning for a strategic downsizing of the system. They're not planning to transition their systems from the big sprawling systems that they are today to something that is right-sized for achieving our climate targets. And they're not doing that because, primarily because of the obligation to serve. They say we have a legal obligation to give anybody who wants gas, and so we are planning to just keep giving everybody who wants fossil gas. So they are not even kind of looking into pathways for doing the things that are called on by the Climate Action Council. And that planning is really essential, and it's really essential to do it now so that we have the maximum amount of time to exercise that plan. Because, you know, we're talking about transitioning, you know, the built environment. We're talking about transitioning infrastructure that lasts for 30, 40, 50, you know, sometimes 100 years. So, you know, these are not things that we can just change overnight, and it is really important to do that long-term planning. The other critically important way that it will address some of these issues is by enabling neighborhood scale non-pipeline alternatives, basically alternatives to traditional infrastructure projects. So just kind of, I think it was Allison mentioned that, you know, it often costs about $10 million per mile to replace leak-prone pipe. That is money that could be redirected to literally buy all the folks served by that pipe, all of the electric appliances they need, and do the electrical building work necessary to move them over. Now, you know, the way that those neighborhood scale alternatives will work, you know, we'll probably be starting from, you know, the radial edges from the system or parts of the system where, you know, either because of the amount of customers or the building stock, it makes sense. It provides a kind of better opportunity to kind of to implement these non-pipeline alternatives and to get them done. But there's an enormous opportunity there to redirect massive sums of money that we would spend otherwise just on the same stuff that has been kind of poisoning us and you know, harming our public health for years. We can just redirect that spending to the things we need to transition us to a better future. So those non-pipeline alternatives are not going to solve the entire problem. That's why we need to do the planning I mentioned at the start. And we're going to have to think about, you know, we're going to have to continue to be innovative in our policy solutions to make sure that no one's left behind, but it will provide us an enormously helpful tool to really get the momentum going and to make sure that we're not squandering kind of the best opportunities for paring back the system by allowing, you know, this long-lived brand new pipe replace this functional pipe that is happening at the clips that it's going on today.
Yes, thanks for that, Chris. You know, basically, to summarize, right now, the utilities are very limited in what they're actually allowed to spend money on. Even if they wanted to give everyone a heat pump and upgrade the electrical system for a street or a neighborhood instead of replacing the gas pipe, they're literally not allowed to. That's why we have to, one of the reasons we have to pass this bill. So I would definitely, and Allison had to drop off. So a farewell to Allison, and thanks so much. What do you think, Betta? Should we close it out or?
I think we should. I don't want to be a hog with people's time. Really appreciate everybody joining on their lunch hour. And it's so, so good to see you all. And I know that 2024 is going to bring a lot of victories. So we just got to keep at it and stick together. And please continue to plug in all of the ways that we can make those calls this afternoon. I just signed up for a slot. So I hope you will too, if you haven't already. And have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll keep at it in the new year. So thanks again. Thanks everybody for being here. Thanks to the amazing team at NYCP for doing all of the things to host these events, and really appreciate everyone's hard work in all of your communities to spread the word and achieve our climate goals and make the world a better place for all New Yorkers and everyone on this planet. So thank you all so much, and take care, everybody.